My wife Genevieve gave a casual shrug and told me she slept with my best friend as if she were merely discussing the rain. I didn't scream or throw anything. Instead, I did something that utterly destroyed them both. You see, I own a substantial logistics company and I document absolutely everything. What I discovered next wasn't just an affair, it was calculated psychological warfare. This is how I made them both pay. My name is Arthur Beaumont. I'm 61 years old, and until 3 months ago, I thought I had it all figured out. I built Beaumont Logistics from nothing but a battered old van back in 1995. 28 years later, I own 47 heavy-duty vehicles and employ 63 drivers across 3 regions. Genevieve and I got married when I was 43. She was a dental hygienist then, all charming smiles and efficiency. I was smitten from day one. She had this way of making you feel like the most important person in the room. The evening it all came apart started like any other Tuesday. I was in my home office when Genevieve knocked on the door frame. "Arthur, we need to talk," she said, settling into the armchair across from my desk. I gave her my full attention. "What's on your mind, sweetheart?" She shrugged like she was mentioning the weather. "I slept with Charles, but honestly, just relax about it. It didn't mean anything. Charles Dubois, my best friend for 32 years, the man who stood beside me at our wedding." The air in the room seemed to thicken. I didn't yell, didn't throw anything. Instead, I stood up slowly and walked to the window. "How long?" I asked. "Does it matter?" "Arthur, you're being dramatic. It just happened. We were drunk after Elise's birthday party last month." I turned around. Genevieve was scrolling through her phone as if we were discussing dinner plans. That's when it hit me. This wasn't her first confession. This was her first announcement. "I need some air," I said, grabbing my car keys. "Don't be like this," Genevieve called. "It's not a big deal. People make mistakes." I drove to my office downtown. The building was empty, just the hum of computers. I sat in my chair and opened my computer, accessing the security system I'd installed months ago. For documentation purposes, I told myself. The footage was all there. Dates, timestamps, license plates. Charles's sleek BMW in my driveway on afternoons when I was supposedly at the yard. Audio from the doorbell camera. My wife and my best friend, thinking they were invisible. I printed everything. Screenshots, message logs, credit card statements showing hotel charges on days she claimed to be shopping. The printer hummed for 20 minutes. By 10 p.m., I had a stack of papers. I drove back home and saw Genevieve's car gleaming under the porch light. I walked over and carefully placed the printed screenshots under her windshield wiper. Then I went inside, packed a bag, and drove to my secluded villa in the countryside. My phone started buzzing around midnight, but I'd already turned it off. The next morning would bring consequences. Tonight was just for thinking about how a man rebuilds when the foundation turns out to be quicksand. The villa had always been my sanctuary. I'd built it myself 12 years ago when business was booming and I needed somewhere to clear my head. Cedar walls, a stone fireplace, and 40 acres of woods where a man could think without interruption. I'd brought Genevieve here exactly twice. She always complained about the lack of signal and the rustic bathroom. I woke up at dawn to 17 missed calls and 12 text messages. The phone had somehow turned itself back on during the night. I scrolled through Genevieve's increasingly frantic messages without opening them. The preview text told me everything. "Arthur, what is this? We need to talk now. This is insane. Call me back. You can't just disappear like this." Then came the calls from Charles. 3 voicemails I deleted without listening to. Some bridges don't deserve the courtesy of burning slowly. I made coffee in the old percolator and sat on the porch, watching the sun climb over the tree-line. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt completely at peace. My phone buzzed with an incoming call from Dominic Morrow. Dominic had been my lawyer since I started the business, a cantankerous old bulldog who charged premium rates and delivered results. I answered on the second ring. "Arthur, where the hell are you?" Dominic's gravelly voice came through clear despite the weak signal. Taking some time to think, "Dominic, what's the word?" "Your wife showed up in my office an hour ago with a stack of papers. demanding to know if they're real. She looked like she'd been hit by a freight train. I took a sip of coffee, savoring the bitter taste. And what did you tell her? Nothing, of course. Client confidentiality. But Arthur, where did you get surveillance footage of her car at the Hotel Royale and credit card records from her personal account? I run a logistics company, Dominic. GPS tracking and financial monitoring are part of the business. Amazing what you can learn when you pay attention to the details. Dominic chuckled, a sound like gravel in a cement mixer. You sneaky bastard. How long have you been collecting this? Let's just say I've been thorough. Can you meet me tomorrow morning? I think it's time we had a serious conversation about asset protection. Already cleared my calendar. And Arthur, that prenup you insisted on 18 years ago is looking pretty smart right about now. After hanging up, I walked down to the small dock I'd built on the pond. This new version of Arthur Beaumont was someone I was just beginning to meet. And frankly, I liked him better already. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to the message. Elise Dubois's shaky voice came through the speaker. Arthur, it's Elise. Charles told me what happened. I'm so sorry. I had no idea. Can you please call me? There are things you need to know about what's been going on. I deleted the message and turned off the phone again. Whatever Elise had to say could wait. Dominic Morrow's law office hadn't changed in 20 years. Same leather chairs, same mahogany desk scarred by decades of heated negotiations. Dominic himself looked like he'd been carved from European stone. 67 years old, silver-haired, and meaner than a cornered badger when protecting his clients. Sit down, Arthur. We need to talk about your father, Dominic said, pouring 2 cups of black coffee. That stopped me cold. My father, Dominic? He's been dead 15 years. Your biological father. The one your mother never told you about. Dominic slid a manila folder across the desk. Charles Dubois's daddy was a traveling salesman who made stops in 3 regions. Your mother was one of his regular customers, if you catch my meaning. I opened the folder with hands that suddenly felt unsteady. Birth certificates, DNA test results, private investigator reports dating back 6 months. The numbers didn't lie. Charles Dubois was my half-brother. How long have you known? I asked. Since you hired me to draw up that prenup 18 years ago. I ran background checks on everyone in your circle, including Charles. Found some inconsistencies. Started digging. Your mother took this secret to her grave, but records don't lie. I stared at a photograph of Charles's father, my father. Same jawline, same hands, same crooked smile I saw in the mirror every morning. Does Charles know? Not unless he's done his own DNA work. But here's the kicker, Arthur. Genevieve found out 3 months ago. The coffee turned acid in my mouth. How? One of those ancestry websites. She submitted your DNA without telling you. Said it was for a surprise family tree project. When the results came back showing Charles as a close relative, she put the pieces together. The room spun slightly. Genevieve hadn't just cheated with my best friend. She'd cheated with my brother, knowing exactly what it would do to me. This wasn't weakness or opportunity. This was calculated cruelty. There's more, Dominic continued. Your neighbor, Astrid Nowak, has been keeping detailed notes about the comings and goings in the neighborhood for 40 years. He handed me a composition notebook filled with Astrid's careful handwriting. Dates, times, license plates, even sketches of who went where, when. Buried in those observations were months of evidence about Charles's visits. Astrid came to me yesterday. Said she always suspected something wasn't right about those afternoon visits when you were at work. She's willing to testify. I closed the notebook and leaned back in the leather chair. Dominic, I want to destroy them both. Legally. Completely. Permanently. That's what I was hoping you'd say. Dominic's smile could have curdled milk. Because with what we have here, we're not just talking about divorce. We're talking about fraud, conspiracy, and emotional manipulation. Genevieve knew exactly what she was doing when she targeted your half-brother. 3 days later, I was splitting firewood behind the villa when a silver hatchback pulled into my gravel driveway. A teenage girl got out, all confidence and designer jeans despite being barely old enough to drive. Chloe Dubois, Charles's 17-year-old daughter, walked toward me like she owned the place. Mr. Beaumont, I'm Chloe. I think we need to talk, she said, not asking permission. I set down the axe and wiped my hands on a rag. Chloe, what brings you all the way out here? My dad's an idiot and your wife's a homewrecker, but I'm not here to apologize for either of them. I'm here to make a deal. She sat down on my porch steps without being invited. I'm listening. I've been recording my dad's phone calls for 6 months. Not because I'm nosy, but because he's been promising to pay for my university, then spending the money on hotels and jewelry for your wife instead. She pulled out her phone. I've got everything. Hotel reservations, jewelry store receipts, even him talking to your wife about leaving their spouses. Smart girl. Smarter than her father, apparently. What kind of deal are we talking about? I want my university fund back. Dad spent 18,000 euros of my education money on his midlife crisis. You helped me get it back through the courts, and I'll testify about everything I've seen and heard. I studied her face. No tears, no drama, just cold calculation. Chloe, what you're describing is pretty serious. Your father could face criminal charges for misappropriating your fund. Good. Maybe he should have thought about that before he decided to throw away our family for a married woman. She stood up. Mr. Beaumont, my dad destroyed your marriage and mine, but I'm not going down with his ship. Chloe, you've got yourself a deal, but I want your mother, Elise, to know what's happening every step of the way. She deserves to make her own decisions about your father's behavior. Already planned on it, Mr. Beaumont. As she drove away, I realized that sometimes the best allies come from the most unexpected places. I was cleaning my rifle on the porch when Genevieve's white Mercedes came tearing up the gravel drive like she was being chased by demons. She barely put the car in park before jumping out. Behind her, Charles's BMW pulled in more cautiously. They'd come together, probably thinking there was safety in numbers. Arthur, we need to talk. Genevieve screamed, marching toward the porch. I continued working on the rifle, running the cleaning rod through the barrel with methodical precision. Nothing stopping you from talking, Genevieve. I'm right here. You can't just disappear and file these ridiculous lawsuits. Dominic Moreau is claiming I committed fraud. This is insane. Charles hung back by his car, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. Smart man. You should be worried. Fraud's a strong word, I said, finally looking up at her. But when a woman finds out her husband and her lover are half-brothers, then uses that information to maximize the emotional damage of her affair, what would you call it? The color drained from her face. How did you know about the DNA test you ran without my permission? Dominic is very thorough, also very good at tracing digital footprints. I set down the rifle and stood up. You knew exactly what you were doing, Genevieve. This wasn't some accidental affair. This was calculated psychological warfare. Charles finally found his voice. Arthur, I swear I didn't know we were related. I believe you, Charles. You're stupid, but you're not evil. Her. I pointed at Genevieve. She knew exactly what button to push to hurt me the most. That's not true. Genevieve's voice went up an octave. I made a mistake. People have affairs all the time. People have affairs. They don't research their husband's DNA to find the one person who would cause maximum emotional damage. Your mother knows, by the way, I added. Genevieve went white. My mother? You called my mother. Didn't have to. Astrid Nowak called her. Seems your neighbor's been documenting Charles's visits for months. Old Astrid has been watching the neighborhood like a hawk for 40 years. She knows when the postman's running late, let alone when married men are sneaking around with other men's wives. Charles looked sick. Arthur, we can work this out. We're family, man. Family doesn't sleep with family's wives. And family doesn't steal from their own daughters to pay for hotel rooms. I smiled as Charles's face went pale. Yeah, Chloe told me everything. How you've been dipping into her university fund to wine and dine my wife. Real classy, Charles. You're going to destroy us both over one mistake. Genevieve asked, tears starting to form. One mistake. I laughed, a sound with no humor in it. Genevieve, you've been planning this for months. The DNA test, the affair, even the way you told me about it. You wanted to watch me break. Problem is, you underestimated what kind of man you married. I walked back toward the cabin. Dominic will be in touch about the settlement conference. Bring your checkbooks, both of you. The call from Margot Fournier came at 6 o'clock in the morning, 3 days later. Genevieve's mother had been calling every hour since Astrid's bombshell revelation, and I finally decided to answer. Arthur Beaumont, you explain to me right now why my daughter is crying hysterically in my guest bedroom. Margot demanded without preamble. Good morning to you too, Margot. How much did Astrid tell you? Everything. That my daughter has been carrying on with Charles Du Bois for over a year, and that you've known about it for months without saying a word. What kind of man handles marriage problems by hiring lawyers instead of talking to his wife? I poured myself coffee, taking my time. The kind of man whose wife deliberately chose his half-brother as her affair partner after researching his family history to maximize the emotional damage. Dead silence on the other end. Then, quietly, half-brother? DNA doesn't lie, Margot. Genevieve submitted my DNA to one of those ancestry websites 3 months ago. Discovered Charles, and I share a father. Then escalated her affair. This wasn't a mistake. This was psychological warfare. More silence. Felix, even if that's true, surely you can work through this. Marriage requires forgiveness. Marriage requires honesty, Margot. It requires loyalty. Your daughter demonstrated none of those qualities. She made a choice, multiple choices over many months, and now she gets to live with the consequences. I set down my coffee cup. Dolores, I'm sorry you're caught in the middle of this, but your baby made adult choices. Now she gets to face adult consequences. I hung up before she could respond. 20 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Margot. I love my daughter, but what she did to you was unforgivable. I'm sorry. Arthur, you deserve better. Dominic's office felt like a war room. Documents covered every surface. Across the conference table sat Thierry Renaud, Genevieve's high-priced attorney, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. Gentlemen, let's cut through the theatrics, Thierry began. My client is willing to accept a modest settlement to avoid lengthy litigation. Dominic laughed. Thierry, your client stole 18,000 euros from her husband's business account to fund her affair with his half-brother. Modest settlement isn't on the table. The money came from joint marital assets. The money came from Beaumont Logistics operating accounts. I interrupted. Accounts she had no legal access to use for purposes that directly violated our prenuptial agreement. Thierry shuffled his papers nervously. Mr. Beaumont, surely you can see that destroying your wife's financial future serves no constructive purpose. Constructive purpose? I leaned forward. Thierry, your client researched my family history, discovered I had a half-brother, then deliberately targeted him for an affair to maximize emotional damage. That's not adultery. That's psychological warfare. Dominic slid a thick folder across the table. DNA evidence, ancestry website records, email confirmations showing Madame Beaumont's excitement about discovering the family connection. She knew exactly what she was doing. Furthermore, Charles Du Bois has been embezzling from his daughter's university fund. Chloe Du Bois is prepared to testify about 18,000 euros stolen from her education account. Thierry set down his pen. What are you asking for? Complete forfeiture of spousal rights under the prenup, Dominic said. No alimony, no property division, no retirement benefits, plus restitution for stolen funds and legal fees. That's unreasonable. What's unreasonable is a woman who systematically destroyed her marriage for sport, I said. Genevieve gets to keep her personal belongings and her car. Everything else stays with me. She'll be financially ruined. She should have thought of that before she decided to wage psychological warfare against her husband. Thierry gathered his papers. I'll need to discuss this with Madame Beaumont. You do that, but understand something. This offer expires in 48 hours. After that, we're adding criminal fraud charges to the civil suit. The knock on my cabin door came at 7 o'clock in the morning. Charles stood on my porch looking like he'd aged 10 years in the past week. His perfect hair was disheveled, his clothes wrinkled, and his hands shook as he held a manila envelope. Arthur, please, we need to talk, he whispered. I let him in. What's in the envelope, Charles? A signed confession. Everything. The affair, the money I took from Chloe's university fund, even the times I used your business contacts to get better deals for my own clients. He set the envelope on my kitchen table. I'm done fighting this. Why now, Charles? Because Chloe won't speak to me. Because Elise filed for divorce yesterday. Because my boss found out about the embezzlement and fired me. Because I finally realized what I've become. And what's that? A pathetic middle-aged man who destroyed everything good in his life for a woman who never gave a damn about anyone but herself. Genevieve doesn't love me. She never did. She used me to hurt you, and I was too stupid to see it. He stood up, leaving the confession on the table. I just wanted you to know that I understand what I did, and I want to give you everything you need to make sure she pays for what she's done. After he left, I sat reading through his handwritten statement. 23 pages of detailed admissions that would guarantee Genevieve's complete financial destruction. My phone rang. Dominic's number. Arthur, you're not going to believe this. Genevieve just showed up in my office demanding to know why Charles won't return her calls. He just left here. Brought me a full confession. A confession? Arthur, this changes everything. With Charles's testimony, we can prove criminal conspiracy. She's not just losing the divorce. She's looking at potential jail time. I looked out my kitchen window. Dominic. Sometimes justice takes its own sweet time, but when it finally arrives, it doesn't mess around. The courthouse in the city buzzed with activity as our case reached its conclusion. Judge Helene Lambert, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, had reviewed all evidence over 3 days of testimony. Genevieve sat beside Thierry Renaud, looking pale and defeated. Mr. Beaumont, Judge Lambert began. This court has reviewed extensive evidence of marital fraud, financial theft, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The defendant's actions constitute a deliberate pattern of psychological warfare against her spouse. Dominic squeezed my shoulder. Furthermore, the judge continued, the defendant's use of ancestry research to identify and target the plaintiff's half-brother demonstrates premeditation that elevates this beyond simple adultery. Thierry tried one last objection. Your Honor, my client's mental state. Your client's mental state was clear enough to research family genealogy, coordinate financial fraud, and systematically deceive multiple parties for over a year, Judge Lambert interrupted. This court finds the prenuptial agreement enforceable in its entirety. The gavel came down like thunder. Genevieve forfeited all spousal rights, owed restitution for stolen funds, and faced criminal charges for financial fraud. Outside the courthouse, Chloe Dubois waited by my truck. Mr. Beaumont, I wanted to thank you. The university fund money Dad stole. I'm getting every penny back, plus interest. You earned it, Chloe. Standing up to your own father took real courage. He's not my father anymore. Blood doesn't make family. Loyalty does. She handed me a graduation invitation. I'm getting a full scholarship. Business major. Maybe someday I'll run a company as honestly as you do. As she drove away, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Genuine pride. So what's next, Arthur? Dominic joined me. Back to running my business. Building things instead of tearing them down. I looked at the courthouse where my marriage had officially ended. Dominic, I learned something important. When someone shows you who they really are, believe them the first time. And when they try to destroy you, make sure they learn the difference between a victim and an adversary. 1 year later, I stood on the porch of my villa, watching the sunrise paint the hills gold. The call from Dominic had come the night before. Genevieve's criminal trial had ended with a guilty verdict. 2 years in state prison for fraud, plus 5 years probation. Charles had testified against her to reduce his own sentence. My phone buzzed with a text from Margot. Arthur, justice was served. I'm sorry it took so long for me to see who my daughter really was. You deserve better. I'd forgiven Margot months ago. Sometimes good people raise bad children despite their best efforts. The sound of tires on gravel announced my morning visitor. Sophie Leclerc stepped out of her blue car, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the smile that had been brightening my days for the past 8 months. She was a librarian from the nearby town, 54 years old, divorced with grown children, and a laugh that could chase away any shadow. Morning, handsome, Sophie said, settling beside me on the porch swing I'd built last month. Morning, beautiful. How did the book club meeting go last night? Heated discussion about whether the heroine should have forgiven her cheating husband. Sophie handed me my coffee. I may have mentioned that some betrayals don't deserve forgiveness. Speaking from experience? Speaking from watching a good man rebuild his life after someone tried to destroy it. She leaned against my shoulder. I thought about it, watching a hawk circle overhead, realizing that Genevieve's betrayal said everything about her character and nothing about mine. When someone shows you who they are, you can either let it destroy your faith in people or use it to appreciate the ones worth trusting. And which camp do I fall into? Sophie Leclerc, you're living proof that good people still exist. Plus, you actually read the fine print before signing anything. We sat in comfortable silence, watching the day begin. My phone remained silent. No desperate calls, no manipulation, no drama, just peace. Beaumont Logistics was thriving. Chloe Dubois had started working part-time in my office, learning business management. As for me, I'd learned that the best revenge isn't destruction. It's living well, building instead of tearing down. Choosing people who choose you back. Some endings are really beginnings in disguise.